Well, I mean, first thing, disclaimer with all the games this week, the trade deadline is still looming. I know we had some big news on Saturday and Sunday this weekend with some of the biggest names, but the trade deadline is this Thursday, February 6th. So we still could see some movement with some of these teams. So be careful cautiously with these games. Atlanta enters now off an 8-game losing streak. They do have a day of rest after the Indiana loss. I will say it's a step down in class for them after playing Minnesota, Houston, Cleveland, Indiana, 4 straight losses against those squads. And it's actually a quick revenge spot also because they just played Detroit back on January 22nd. That was the second of these 8 straight losses. Meanwhile, Detroit does enter this game off back-to-back wins. As you mentioned, they beat Chicago last night. It's now their 3rd game in 4 days, no rest situation. The line might look short, and it's hard to trust Atlanta off 8 losses, but I think a little bit of a contrarian call here with the Atlanta Hawks +4 tonight.
Liking the Hawks here in a tough spot here for Detroit. Speaking of tough spots, well, I guess maybe it's not because the Bucks aren't playing Memphis, which appears to be the kryptonite here, Merrill. The Bucks cannot beat the Memphis Grizzlies. They looked old and slow in that fourth quarter last night. Memphis looked a lot more spry. They turned up the tempo, and that was all she wrote for the Bucks. But now they've got to go back on the road to OKC, who seems to be getting a little bit of money here, up to 11.5. And who can blame them? They're rested. They're at home. And my goodness, who the heck knows who's even going to play for Milwaukee tonight?
Yeah, for everybody that clicked subscribe and click the bell here on WagerTalk TV, they got a nice free play video Saturday afternoon. I did the Thunder and Sacramento game. So some nice weekend content, and I did give everyone a free play on Sacramento. In fact, I'm sorry, on Oklahoma City against Sacramento. And that line actually dropped from 9 down to 7.5 on Saturday because Jalen Williams was not going to play. And he averages about 20 points a game, but he's not the key player. Gilchrist is obviously the key player on that team, and I thought it was a very focused spot for OKC after losing 2 of their previous 3 games, and they routed the Kings by 34 points, 144 to 110. That was the play-on spot for Oklahoma City, in my opinion. Now, with that said, I do not trust the Milwaukee Bucks for the reasons you just mentioned. They've dropped 4 of their last 5 straight up, 3 straight losses, now traveling without rest, 3rd game in 4 nights. As of 12:30 Eastern here, we don't have the Milwaukee injury report. Wouldn't be surprised to maybe see some guys out, even though they've lost 3 straight. Jalen Williams is now questionable to maybe return for Oklahoma City. I'm going to stay away from the side. I think there's too much uncertainty there. But we have seen some money coming on the under, and I agree with that move. It's gone from 234.5 down to 232.5. There are some 233s out there still. Just can't imagine, Joe, that Milwaukee wants to run here, playing their 3rd game in 4 nights, a no rest back-to-back situation. OKC's got 6-7 guys on the injury list, even if Williams returns. A lot of points here. We got a lot of wiggle room with the under here with all the uncertainty in this game tonight.
Yeah, I mean, Middleton close to, 28, 29 minutes. Lillard, as well as Giannis, 37, 38 minutes in that game. Now, it's a tough spot for Milwaukee here tonight in this one.
Steve Merrill, 8 o'clock Eastern, CBS Sportsnet. William Mary coming off a 41-point blowout against Campbell. We talked about that a little bit on last call Saturday. So it will be interesting to see how they bounce back against what I think is probably the best team in the conference still. Early money has come in on Charleston. The line's gone from 2 up to 3.5. Total's gone from 165.5 up to 166.5. William Mary plays extremely fast this year. We all know that, but Charleston does as well. So it should be a really entertaining game. And the Tribe hasn't really beaten quality teams yet. So we'll see if they can step up in class here and get it done at home tonight, but should be a nice atmosphere. Well, so I just talked about how we can dig into the game book from Super Bowl 57, but one guy you're not going to see in that game book is rookie Xavier Worthy, and I want to focus on him because I think he could be the X factor, no pun intended, but he's the fastest guy in the NFL. He broke the all-time 40-yard record in the Combine. He is a speed threat, but something else I look for with props in general in all sports is guys that are coming on more now than maybe their overall seasonal stats. Because, look, odds makers, they're smart. They look at the recent form, but they also are using seasonal stats. And Worthy is a guy that has vastly overachieved here the last couple months, and it makes so much sense because when you have a young rookie, 28th pick overall, first-round pick out of Texas, he's not going to necessarily get a lot of playing time early on. And you look at his receptions and targets for the first couple months of the season. In fact, we'll just look at the first 4 games this year. He had 4 targets or less in every game. His over-under receptions, by the way, is 5.5 for the Super Bowl. And he only had 4 targets in each of the first 4 games. And then all of a sudden in October, he had 22 targets in the next 3 games. You look at some of the games down the stretch. He didn't play in the finale against Denver, but in the final 3 regular season games, he had 31 targets and he had 21 receptions in the final 3 regular season games. So you can see the increase, and it has continued in the playoffs. Targeted 13 times with 11 receptions. And what that tells you is they're getting the ball to him in high percentage situations. So I do think the over 5.5 at plus money is worth a look. If you can find over 5, I would lay the juice because then you only lose with 4 or less. We got to get to 6 or more, and he's had 6 and 5 in each playoff game. But once again, the 3 regular season finales, 8, 7, and 6. The 2 before that, 5 and 5. So at plus money, over 5.5 receptions for Xavier Worthy makes sense. And I think you might see some quick dump-offs also, some quick receptions because he is so fast, especially in the Super Bowl. You're going to see some different type of offensive game planning from Andy Reid, who's as good as anyone's ever been off a bye week in his career. Talk about a crazy stat. I believe he's the all-time career win leader for both the Chiefs and Eagles as head coach. And that was like 2 years ago when they were in Super Bowl 57. Just an incredible stat and an incredible coach. So I think they're going to find a way to get the fastest man in the NFL the ball quite often in Super Bowl 59.
Look at the props. You know, I have a 9-play prop report out for the clients for Super Bowl Sunday. We have a 5% big ticket on the game. I have a 5% big ticket in college hoops tonight. There's lots of good bets out there right now. All right. But when we're talking about the best bets prop-wise for Super Bowl Sunday, for me, oftentimes they come with laying some juice and laying a price because the public has inflated some of these plus price opportunities. You know, score in the final 2 minutes of the first half, minus 330, the prevailing number out there. Do we expect to score in the final 2 minutes of the first half? Hell yeah, we do. Should it be a 3-1 favorite? Yes, it should be a 3-1 favorite. These are 2 teams that when they get the opportunity at the end of the half, they have the capacity to move the ball down the field and put points on the board. But are you going to find a casual bettor that's going to lay 3-1 on that? Hell no. That's all wise guys, and it's wise guys for a reason.
I actually like Pat Mahomes going over his longest rush for the game. The reason why I'm not going to be ISOing in strictly on his total yards is because how many times have we seen this get absolutely burnt by kneel downs at the end of the game? The gamesmanship where they'll run backwards for 15 yards even. So no one wants to be standing there with a Pat Mahomes total yards ticket that you lose on. So if you're going to bet Pat Mahomes, take the rush attempts over. But the one that I like is taking his longest rush over. Sure, if you look over the past couple weeks and you're trying to cash a ticket as the number sitting right now around 13.5, he's been right around that number, under more than he has been over. But one thing that I know my birds do every single week, especially when you got a quarterback with some legs on him, is give up one of those big runs. They did it to Jaden Daniels last week. If you look at whenever they're playing teams with a little bit of a leggy quarterback, they gave it up, against the Jaguars with Lawrence. They even gave up a big rush to Matt Stafford in that game. And I don't think we think Matt Stafford's a big rusher. So with it sitting around 13.5, Joe, I think if you want to get down on some Pat Mahomes rushing, taking his longest attempt is the best way to just make it a one-and-done prop that you're not sitting there with a losing ticket because of some craziness at the end of the game if Kansas City does get the win done. So it's not all birds props that I have for you, Joe. We do have one Pat Mahomes prop there for you.
And we're going to look at player props for the Super Bowl. And I have one for you here, Joe. Let's look at Jalen Hurts. I think the biggest misconception about this Super Bowl, you talk to the casuals and they're all saying Saquon's going to go off for $150 and 3 tutties. Like that's just going to be something that's easy to do. Well, I'll tell you what, nobody's gone over 120. No running back has run for 120 yards in the last 20 years. And no running backs run for 100 yards against a Steve Spagnuolo defense in 18 straight games. I know damn well that if Barkley goes off for 150 yards and 3 tutties, the Eagles are going to win in a rout. I know it. You know it. Teddy knows it. Steve Merrill knows it. And be sure that Steve Spagnuolo knows it as well. So he's going to be heavily invested in picking your poison, focus on slowing down Saquon. And, as you stack players in the closer to the line of scrimmage, that leaves open receivers or single coverage, one-on-one matchups. But I think that the Chiefs are going to be comfortable letting Jalen Hurts try to beat them. If they've got to pick their poison, they're just not going to open the door for Saquon to run all over them, because that would be a disaster. And they'd rather see Jalen Hurts attempt to pick them apart and see if he can do it. And speaking of Hurts, Super Bowl 57, 304 yards on 27 of 38 passing. He also ran for 70 yards and a couple touchdowns as well. But yeah, 210 and a half yards for Jalen Hurts to over 210 and a half passing yards. I just don't think that the running lanes are going to be there for Barkley, and I think they're going to dare Hurts to throw the ball, and I think he can at least get over 210 and a half yards.
Tell me about the Rockets and the Knicks here tonight. The Knicks, some injury concerns happening here. The Rockets have had some injuries. Sengun, whether or not he's going to go. Van Fleet's been questionable. Knicks at home at the Garden. What are we thinking about this game tonight?
Well, I'm glad that you asked, Joe, because when I did my research for this game, my knee-jerk reaction was, I like Houston plus the points. And I dug into it a little bit, and then I see Van Fleet is out. Van Fleet is not going to play tonight. So I started thinking to myself, well, who's going to pick up the slack with Van Fleet out? And I'm looking at Amen Thompson. The guy was drafted as a point guard, played point guard until he arrived in the NBA. He's been playing some forward, small forward mostly, but he is their backup point guard. So he will get the opportunity to strut his stuff as a playmaker here. And he's going up against a Knicks team that might be without OG Anunoby. That will certainly be a benefit to him, not having to deal with Anunoby. And the Knicks record with and without Anunoby is something we've talked about quite a bit. Thompson's really stepped up his game. He's averaging 13.6 points per game on the season. But if you just look in January alone, 18.7 points per game. He does get a fair amount of assists. And, you got young players like this stepping up for Houston. There's a reason why they're only a half game back of Memphis in the division. This guy's a guy that's on the rise, and this is a real big opportunity for him to finally play his natural position. So I'm expecting big things from Amen Thompson. We're going to go over 21 and a half points and assists.
Oh, 21 and a half points and assists. That kid is really starting to come into his own. All of Houston, in fact.
I think that blown lead, as you mentioned, I think that sets up a get-right game for Kansas. I think this is an easy one, to tell you the truth, Joe. One does not bet against Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse. It's simply something that you're not going to get up and excited to do that. You look at their overall record with Bill Self at home, 292-16 in home games. At one point, they won 69 straight at home. And I know they haven't looked as sharp this year. They've lost a couple home games, but let's look into those. So they lose in double overtime to Houston. Houston's a pretty damn good team. No shame in that. And then they lost a 1-point game against West Virginia. Iowa State comes in. They're looking a little bit suspect themselves. They're coming off a road loss at Arizona, and then they lose by 19 to a very below average Kansas State team. I know some of us at WagerTalk are Kansas State fans, but they're not exactly looking great in the Big 12 this year. You look at Iowa State, they've already lost at West Virginia, at Arizona. It certainly doesn't get any easier at Kansas. Just not enough points to even entertain the thought of taking Iowa State. And like I said, it's a get-right game for Kansas. I'll take the Jayhawks. I will try to get them on the money line, though. I was able to get this at 130. I wake up awful early because I'm on the other side of the world. Last I checked, I saw some 140s. If you can get it at 140 or lower, I would go money line rather than laying 2 or 2.5. But once it gets closer to 150, you're just going to have to lay the points because the value has been sucked up there. But yeah, Kansas all the way for me.